he's a pleasure to have around. He's going to take you to the deep end. So open your mind, heart, your hands, and give a warm welcome to Todd Fink.
Thank you so much, Maureen, and everyone, all my friends here. Sky, it's good to have you with us today. Thanks for sharing your beautiful music. I feel so relaxed. Oh my gosh. Takes away some of the nerves associating with speaking in front of a group. Maureen said before that kindness leads, kindness holds the door. And that inspired me to think deeper about how kindness is essential in leadership and the kinds of leadership that exists in the world, and how we so desperately need leaders in this modern era during this great transition, also digital transition, technological transition, political transition. We need leaders that put people first, that would be last to eat and first to go into danger, but we often don't get to see that modeled. So I was thinking deeper about what it means to have transformative leadership in our work, in our families, in our activities, in our daily life. This can happen. We can be part of this with or without a position or a status in society, even without a leadership title. It's not necessarily about that. We think of this first as an outward process, like how to galvanize people or how to guide or coach others. But really, the transformation I'm talking about begins with ourselves. It's an inner process. So anyone can become leaders by way of the inner work. Take mental health treatment, for example. Every time someone accesses help and recovers or heals with depression or substance use disorder, they make it easier for the next person, because every time they engage in this journey, they demonstrate hope and give it. So it reduces the stigma surrounding these conditions. Someone wasn't well, and now they're well or doing better. So there are realities to mental health conditions that others can see who may not understand it in that way. Otherwise, how did treating a condition improve it? And the words leader or leadership, it comes from this root word in Old English, lead, which meant a route or a way. And there are as many ways to do something as there are people on the planet. Anytime we expand in wisdom, we reveal another way. It's such an organic and humble way to approach what it means to lead, which is through inspiration, inspiring by example. But then this word became a verb, laden, or to lead, which meant to go the way, to know the way, and then show the way. Our inner work is not simply like personal development, self-improvement, or adding on to what we have, including metaphysically, like adding knowledge. But a theme that I keep revisiting, like we talked about with integrity unwoven, that rather this kind of transformation involves acknowledging and removing the barriers to understanding, to cooperation, and ultimately to harmony with the earth and its inhabitants. Here's what comes up for me when I think about transformative leadership and kindness in this way. What needs to come out for it to shine unimpeded? First, the absence of conceit. And none of this is all or nothing. It is a path of revelation. Conceit is excessive pride that closes people off from one another. Morality is often introduced to us as being good for the wrong reasons. Like fearing God can mean one is trying to win approval or avoid hell or earn heaven, and then might be only pretending to be good to attain something, and not for goodness sake, like with Santa. So it's another example. Be good and Santa will give you gifts. And I'm not saying we can't create meaning with these beliefs or traditions, but it's important to understand that everything we do or have has a corollary or counterpart on the earth. And when you set up these sort of pass fail moralities, these binaries, then people will just do what you need to do to pass and not necessarily go deeper into what does a good life look like? What does it mean to be good-hearted? What does it mean to transform ourselves, to see the truth of our interconnection? So we might talk about this as blessings of the universe, but it's just good to remember that where we derive these blessings, these benefits. So sometimes this is subtle, like in gratitude, when gratitude only equals blessings and not the acknowledgement that there may be some inherent privilege or an opportunity that we receive through no merit of our own, but is denied elsewhere through no fault of one's own. And when we uproot this conceit, this idea that I exist independent of the rest, and that I am more important than the rest and don't belong to each other, we don't belong to one another. But when we uproot it, we can feel and we can directly perceive the interdependence with nature and even with other sentient beings. Also, our modern leaders are typically rewarded for their certitude with anything, whereas true leadership really needs to be open and fluid and connecting with the solutions as they present themselves in concert with the needs or the will of the people that we serve. So absence of conceit. The second one is absence of deceit. Deceit threatens the coherence to all the dimensions of life, which speaks to our trustworthiness. And like we were saying before, with integrity. A third one is the absence of indifference. It's popular now to not give an F about things, but I think that's too extreme. I think we ought to care, but not worry too much. Fourth is an absence of control. It can be really nebulous between the urge to save the world and the will to rule it. We could think about like parents and children. Parents have authority and therefore they have power and a leadership role over their children. But there's a difference between collaborating in this partnership and ruling children. Fifth one is the absence of ignorance. And again, this takes time to shine a light on our dark parts. And it's a process. Bringing light to those places where it might not be comfortable to really explore. And coming back to our privileges, sometimes people ignore this idea, like, what am I born with? What are the opportunities that are just inherent because I'm a man, for instance? And sometimes people ignore it because they don't feel it. Like, I don't feel any privilege because I feel more the struggle. But in the matrix of privilege and subjugation, our default sense tends to go to the mistreatment. We even often build our identity around what stands out negatively to others. But this makes it so hard to talk about any of the systemic imbalances, power imbalances, and have meaningful dialogue. So privilege isn't a feeling, it's a reality. And another big one with this is love. Who has love and who doesn't? which children have the full support of their parents and who doesn't, who have their parents and who doesn't. You can't necessarily see it by looking at someone, but as again, as a straight white male that I am, if I can't talk about racism or patriarchy because of some other intersection of my identity, like a health issue or a socioeconomic status, then we can't lead, we can't heal society and repair historical wrongs or atrocities. And then the last one is the absence of haste with all of this. There's an importance to timing, reflection, and thoughtful action. Any kind of leadership requires an integration of our hands, our heart, and our head, which reflects action, emotion, feeling, empathy, compassion, and intellect or logic or rationality. There's a book from authors Anthony Kelly and Sandra Sewell, who are Australian social work educators, and they have a book called With Head, Heart, and Hand. And they put forth some ideas for leading and cultivating social change by knowing, feeling, and doing together, and describing these three human capacities and how each one is important in and of itself. But no one of these by itself and without the addition of the other two, not even just one, that even taken in pairs, no two are sufficient without the third. So for example, head and hand, like without the heart, this is a familiar combination in public life. The politician or public administrator whose feelings are blocked, whose heart is disconnected or considered irrelevant. Or we could have heart and hand without the head. And this can lead to impulsive or undisciplined action. Head and heart without our hands. This can leave one stuck with knowledge and good intentions, but with no action direction to pursue. So bringing, again, all of these three together in a piece of work, in art, or in a relationship with someone, or to an understanding of our context is to expand a social reality to at least these dimensions. Head, heart, and hand points to a quality of wholeness that we've talked about before with kindness, even an attempt at wholeness in our life and in our work. What is the difference between a ruler and a leader? I think there might be some Venn diagram overlapping, but for the most part, they can be quite different. Because a true leader, when it comes to some formal role, again, needs to be able to subdue their self-interest and put the needs and the concerns of the people that they serve ahead of their own. But we know that this isn't really the case in today's world. But that's why spirituality is important, because it's about being the light. Or you may be familiar with the Cardinal Newman poem, Lead Kindly Light. It's about bringing light to where there's darkness, or like in the prayer of St. Francis, where there's darkness, let me bring light. And I'd like to draw attention to some of these tensions between these positions of power and the true spirit of leadership. One is the source of power. For a leader, their source is through inspiration. It's the earth. It's the shared abundance. For a ruler, it might be preordained, like royalty. It might be the power to enforce, or power that was stolen or usurped. And then the power dynamic with the people between and the community, between a leader versus a ruler. For the leader, this is collaborative. This is about partnering. For the ruler, it's about hierarchy and the hierarchical relationship of command and control and the subjects are expected to obey. Mary Parker Follett was a pioneering management thinker in the United States at the turn of the 20th century. And she emphasized the importance of collaborative leadership and had a unique way of describing power with versus power over. And then the approach to power. A true leader decentralizes it, starting with themselves. So can leverage their privilege, or could be willing even to lose their position to uplift others. And sometimes this is difficult. I think we're seeing this in society as there's a struggle for equality. There's a saying that for somebody with a lot of privilege, equality can feel like victimization. I think there's another way to think about this also, that sometimes through just from how we're born, we inherit some opportunity or benefit. Like I said, like being a straight white male, not only being male, but like a male for me, like being the captain of a football team or being popular in school. So it's like there was even a spectrum there of benefits that I derived, but thinking about how to decentralize that and share that. But the other way I was going to say this is sometimes this is like a high with substances. And when you remove the elevated experience, the elevated status, a person doesn't just neatly come back to their baseline. We call this the valley in substance use treatment, or withdrawal or detox. And so sometimes people need support, you know. I think it contributes to some of the male mental health issues as society changes in the technological age, and the stereotypes and the roles for men and women shift. And as men try to reorient to purpose, they might struggle with loneliness and even depression. So it's about also being able to educate people about the changes in society and how this could feel and how we could still support one another. Because it's not as simple as, well, you know, you've had your reign or whatever, because everybody's health affects everybody else. Every boy has a mother, you know, for example. So supporting one another through these shifts that need to happen. And then the approach to power with leadership. Again, for the ruler, they're trying to centralize it. They're trying to have top-down governance and maintain the status quo, whereas a true leader is trying to redistribute the gifts. And I've said this before, that's my conception of abundance, that I can keep giving, and then the universe will trust me as a conduit. And when I hold on to something, it's actually a reflection of my lack of faith, right, in the abundance of the earth, that because of fear, I want to protect this. But if I give it away, it's really a demonstration of my faith, of my trust in the goodness of the higher power, or the divine, or the universe. And finally, a change in power, like I'm talking about. For the ruler, it's rigid. They don't want to lose it. For the leader, it's fluid, and the leader is adaptable. There are a couple different schools of thought here that kind of reflect some of this that I find interesting. Like Plato, in his work, The Republic, he introduces the concept of the philosopher king. And he argues that rulers should be those who are the most knowledgeable or the wisest. And that philosophy is central to this. Like, philosophy is not just an ideology or a theory, but it's a practice, and knowledgeable about what is good and what is just. So leadership in Plato's view should not be about power or privilege, but about service and wisdom. However, in Machiavelli's view, in The Prince, he offers a pragmatic, sometimes controversial view on leadership, which he argues to maintain power, it's necessary to be immoral, at least sometimes. And while many view Machiavelli's work as a manual for ruthless leadership, others do interpret it as a satire or simply a critique of power. A couple other dynamics that are interesting between Max Weber, the German American sociologist. He introduced a concept of charismatic authority. He argued that certain leaders gain this not because of a tradition or legal means, but because of their personal charm. And he also warned of the dangers of this turning into a cult of personality. And I think we see that a lot, where we lose sight of the politics at the grassroots level, where if you care about an issue, Like the true engagement of leadership is being of service in your community, creating safe spaces, providing support or shelter to victims of domestic violence, not just defending a person, not just blindly following a person and thinking that that will solve all our problems. John Locke, alternatively, in his political writings, emphasized the social contract between leaders and the governed. And he argued that leaders derive this position from the consent of the people, and that they therefore have a responsibility to protect the rights, the human rights of the people. And if a leader violates this contract, they ought to be justly overthrown. And this reminded me actually of a lesson, a painful lesson of mine that I learned in elementary school. And I don't know why this memory came back to me, but it did. So I thought I would share it. When I was in like 4th or 5th grade, our elementary school had these poetry fests. I think they're probably pretty common in a lot of schools. And each class would have like 1 or 2 representatives. And I think this was like in 4th grade. I had my Shel Silverstein poem, and a few of us wanted to represent our class, and we had a vote. Everybody who wanted to shared their poem, and then we voted on who should go on behalf of the class. And I won by 1 vote. I had 13 votes and Susie had 12. But the teacher didn't say you couldn't vote for yourself. And I voted for myself. And afterwards, Susie came over to me and said, to congratulate me, and said, and I also voted for you. And then I just blurted out, "Oh, I voted for myself." And I just saw this look of disappointment on her face, and she was like, "Oh." And then I quickly realized like what Susie did. Susie voted for me thinking I want to support somebody else, and we'll let the class decide who they want to represent them. And I felt this right away. And I said to her, I said, you did the noble, or whatever, my child voice, you did the bigger thing, and thought about what the whole group wanted, not just what you wanted. And I was just thinking about myself, but it couldn't be undone. And because we already voted, but that stuck with me, that it's up to the people, it's up to others whether or not you should represent them. And in the future, though, I did a campaign for Susie's poem, like in the next year, and got my friends to encourage my friends to pick her, and then she went. Sun Tzu and Lao Tzu have 2 very different ideas about leadership. Sun Tzu, in his Art of War, talked about understanding the enemy and knowing the opponent and exploiting them. Like, some of his teachings include appear weak when you're strong, and strong when you're weak. We see this in society now. Like the kings and queens of the past didn't really have a lot of power. They didn't have jets and weapons and global influence and all of that. So they wore jewelry, they wore crowns, and they beheaded people in public. But today, billionaires have tremendous power, but they wear T-shirts and fight capitalism with us. So just a few ideas from Lao Tzu. He divides a leader like a government leader into 4 categories. When it's a supreme person, like a master, the people are hardly aware that he or she exists. That's the best. The next is a leader who's loved by the people. Third is one who's feared, and the worst of all is one who is despised. If you don't trust the people, you make them untrustworthy. When a master work is done, the people say, "Amazing, we did it all by ourselves." And then he goes on later in verse 57, if you want to be a great leader, you must learn how to follow the great way. Stop trying to control. Let go of fixed plans and concepts and help the world govern itself. For governing a country, there's nothing better than moderation. The mark of a moderate leader or a tolerant leader is the freedom from his own ideas, tolerant like the sky, all pervading like sunlight, firm like a mountain in one sense, but supple like a tree in the wind. Without a clear destination in view, they can make use of anything that life happens to bring their way. Nothing is impossible for this one. Because they've let go, they can care for the people's welfare. Just a few final thoughts here. I also really get a lot of inspiration from the philosophy of Hannah Arendt, a German American historian and political philosopher. And she makes some other interesting points that, like, maybe power isn't what we think it is, that power is always in the people, power is always in the earth or in the divine or in the higher power, like God. But because of this, people use violence. People who don't have power, royals use violence, hegemons use violence, because really the power is in the earth. It's not in one person or one family or one socioeconomic strata. And she advocated for councils. This reminds me of indigenous ideas of leadership built on consensus, continuing to dialogue until there's a consensus or council. She also distinguished authority from power, that there could be organic authority, that somebody really dedicates their life to understanding something or to spirituality, and by their own inner work, they have expertise. And the people follow it out of respect, not because they weaponize it. So to conclude, here are a few other intersections of kindness with leadership or dialectics that we can derive strength from our vulnerability. When we can admit mistakes, seek help, and express our genuine emotions, we can build trust and deepen our connection with the people that look up to us. Leading by serving, or servant leadership, in the sense that we prioritize the needs of others and where we see a power imbalance. Like, for example, when I'm at the hospital, there's a power imbalance. I'm a clinician, they're feeling vulnerable or weak. And so to try to leverage that or decentralize that by letting them know this is your choice. And there are other options, that if this process isn't serving you, isn't faithful to you, that I want to empower you to seek the right partnership, and that there's an appreciation for that trust and for entering in that sacred space together. And we can find confidence through our humility. We can speak by listening, leaning in, tuning in, validating, paying attention. That actually says a lot to someone else, that they're safe with you, that they can trust you, that you're not going to judge them. Being decisive in our choices, yet flexible. It doesn't matter how much we've invested into something. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. We ought to be able to shift, to pivot, and having vision, but being grounded, finding stability through change. I've learned these things or offer these things, and I'm not even sure about them, but I offer them up for dialogue and conversation, mostly based on my own mistakes and my flaws, failures, and conflicts in my experiences in work and in life. I'll conclude with this short story. A wise old man was a revered sage in a small fishing village on a river. And he was asked about the essence of Zen and leadership and how to maintain peace of mind amidst challenges posed by being in a role or being in a position of authority. He responded with this: once I was sitting by the river in my boat, lost in meditation, and suddenly it was interrupted and disturbed because I heard a loud noise, and there was another boat with no one in it, which had struck mine. I looked and I saw that the boat was empty. There was no one to shout at, no one to be angry with. This empty boat had just drifted with the current, with the river, and hit mine. It made me smile. And then I went back to my meditation and was undisturbed. So the sage elaborated, if you are empty of your own ego, prejudices, and rigid views, then you won't collide with others, even if they try to provoke you. Just like the empty boat that hit mine, if the boat had someone who intentionally struck mine, I might have shouted back, reacted, and been disturbed. But it was empty, and the result was the same. And so there was no one to contend with, no one to fight with. The villagers contemplated this message and realized the profound lesson of leadership that the sage was conveying. A leader freeing themselves from their own ego and conceit, who does not take things personally, who approaches situations with an open heart, adaptable mind, is less likely to encounter conflicts and more likely to lead with grace, kindness, understanding, and effectiveness. So thank you, everybody. Looking forward to chatting more.